Hello, and thank you for joining Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. My name is Ashley Burrell. I'm the Secretary of the Board for Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. We will be producing monthly podcasts featuring women of color in the peace and security field, so please visit WCAPS.org regularly for more details.
Hello, I'd like to welcome you to another WCAPS podcast. My name is Bonnie Jenkins, and I am the founder, executive director of Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation. And it's really my pleasure to welcome another very distinguished woman in the area who works in peace, security, conflict, and other issues related to those topics. Her name is Eunice Mbarika, and she's actually in Cameroon in Africa. And I had the opportunity to meet her when I was in Ghana with her. We were both in Ghana for an event on nuclear nonproliferation issues and nuclear policy issues, and it was an event for women, and so it was very enlightening. It was a really great experience. And so Eunice is one of the women I met, and I certainly wanted to make sure that I stayed in touch with her so that she could do a podcast so all of you can hear about the wonderful things that she does. So with that, I'm going to ask Eunice to introduce herself to you. So Eunice, say hello to our folks.
Hi. Thank you, Bonnie, for having me. And I look forward to this discussion. It's my pleasure.
Great. So Eunice, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you're from, and what you're doing now in Cameroon.
Right, I'll be glad to do that. Like Bonnie mentioned earlier, I am Eunice Mbarika, and I am the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Administration at the ICT University Cameroon campus, and I'm also the founder of vcademy.com. I am Cameroonian by birth, born and raised, and spent the better half of my life here in Cameroon before moving to the United States to pursue college education.
Great. And tell us a little about what you did, where you went in the U.S., where you went to school, and things like that.
Oh, absolutely. I actually did my, first of all, before moving to the U.S., like I mentioned earlier, I did my primary, secondary, and high school studies in Cameroon, after which I moved to the U.S. in my late teens to pursue undergraduate and graduate education. I did complete my bachelor's degree in management information systems at Our Lady of Lake University in San Antonio, Texas, and my graduate studies in the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. And right after college education, I did have a couple of opportunities from undergrad and graduate studies to actually work in the corporate world over there. And like I mentioned earlier, I did work mostly in the field of technology. And I did have the opportunity as well to gain a lot of experience right after my education, which kind of prepped me into my current career as the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Administration. And just a little bit more about the university where I currently work at. It's a university that actually operates in Cameroon, Uganda, and we're actually working on opening a campus in Nigeria. And we operate on a purely US-based curriculum for our bachelor's, master's, and PhD programs. And we do have graduate and undergraduate students, but most of our graduate programs are online, and our undergraduate courses are online and on-site at the different campuses. And it's been quite an interesting experience as to how I, left from the US and transited into this role, which I'll be glad to talk a little bit more about as we progress in our discussion.
Okay, well, let's do that. Let's start from when you were here in Texas and Florida. What was your major at Texas?
In Texas, I did an undergraduate in management information systems. Mm-hmm. And that's at Our Lady of Lake University in San Antonio. And when I went to grad school in Tampa, Florida, the University of South Florida. My master's was in information systems and decision sciences. So
And
quite a technical
mhm.
background.
And what was the basis of your interest in that field?
I will say this, when it was quite interesting because when I first got to the US, I really wanted to do law. And at the time, I was told that, well, I mean, you're African, you have an accent, you probably won't be able to practice any law in the United States. So um, later, I considered, social work because it was a passion of mine, helping people and making a difference. But when I saw the opportunities in technology and what technology could do, I saw it as a means of making a difference down the road. And I got really curious because I tell you what, before I got to the US, I never really knew how to turn on a computer. And I know this sounds really funny, but in my first programming class, or my computer class, I think it was, I had to look for where to turn it on. And to think that, I've gone such a long way to the point where not only I ended up applying technology or using technology throughout my career, but I taught in the area of technology and today encouraging people in different, in studying and pursuing technology, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, because of the potential that it has in bringing people out of poverty and all of that. It's quite interesting. It's been a long journey, but that's how I came about finding myself in this field and working in the field.
So, just for 1 second, I'm struck by where you said the comment that you shouldn't do law because you had an accent.
Yes.
Did that strike you as a strange statement when they said that to you?
Well, at the time, I thought it was strange. But again, I think that as by the time I got to the US, through my interactions with people, I was getting subtle messages of me being a little bit different because of my accent and all of that. So I kind of felt like that validated the fact that really I couldn't do law. In retrospect now, I see that it wouldn't have really been an issue because sometimes if you don't have the right mentors around you, you can easily be misdirected, or they can make you feel that there are certain limitations which might not really be the case. But I believe that everything worked out for good, because even the field in which I find myself today, I've been able to do much more than I expected. So yes, that's really how that turned out.
And one more question about your, before we transition to your return to Africa, um, what was the transition like going to Texas from Africa?
That is a very good question. I actually, when I came to the United States, I first spent maybe a semester at Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas, before moving to Our Lady of the Lake University. Transition-wise, it's interesting because to me there was a culture shock in different ways. It was a whole different experience for me. For a while, I remember when I first got to the United States, I never used to really understand all accents. As time went on, I could understand all the shows and programs on TV. So I had to learn that. I had to learn to live in a, quite organized in the way things were done in general at school, in the workplace. And so to me, there was a lot of learning. And yes, culture-wise, it was different. I come from Cameroon, where, our two main languages are English and French. We tend to lean more in resemblance to the way the French do things here in Cameroon. But in the United States, it was a whole new world. And yeah, it was different. So in terms of education-wise, I mean, I went to boarding school for the most part when I was in Cameroon, and coming over there to the United States, I was independent. I had to live on my own. I first lived in the dorms, and then I got an apartment. I had never lived on my own in that way. So that was my introduction to adulthood. And I had to learn how to make decisions for myself, to choose courses, a lot of decisions which, initially were made just, almost entirely by my parents. And one thing that is quite different in the education system in Cameroon and in the United States is that by the time that you actually get into college, your path is already predetermined, in the sense that, if you study history or math, that is exactly, if that's what you studied in high school, that is exactly what you're expected to continue with through college. But the United States gave me an opportunity that I wouldn't have had here in Cameroon, in that even though I studied language and history, I was able to come to the United States and study computer science, which is something that would never have happened here in Cameroon. So, I mean, there are a lot of discrepancies, which really worked out for my good at that level, which I can go on and on about. But yes, that's really some of the learnings I had when I just moved to the United States.
And were you, I guess, San Antonio? Were there a number of African Americans there, or people of color when you were at the school?
When I was in San Antonio, I will say no, there really weren't. And it's interesting because in my school, specifically at Lady of Lake University, and not to talk about international students from Africa, I took on that volunteer role to drive the school van to pick them up from the airport. So I basically knew every new international student that came on campus. And at the time, I don't think we were more than 10. It was quite a big campus with maybe 1,000 or more students. And so it was, and the African American community on my campus wasn't really huge. I don't really remember us having any sororities at the time. I just remember that there were other sororities, but I mean sororities that were really for African Americans. The crowd we just didn't have many African Americans on campus. So, it was very different. The interaction there was very different than when I moved to the University of South Florida, which was a lot more diverse than what I experienced at Our Lady of Lake University in San Antonio.
And one more question: what led you to go to that particular school in the U.S.? What led you to going to San Antonio?
Yeah, so when I was in Houston, I attended a community college. So I did go to Texas Southern University, but I also attended a community college and in Houston. And Our Lady of Lake University happened to have a satellite campus on that campus. I think it was called North Harris Community College. And that's how I learned a little bit more about them. And it was a private university. It was Catholic. And because I came from that, boarding school background, the transition just really seemed easy to move to another religious boarding school. And I didn't have much orientation, I must say that, in terms of other schools that I could attend. And that will be for another podcast, because there's been a lot of learning. There's a lot of learning along the way. And I do actually, I actually use some of what I learned to speak to a lot of minority students from minority backgrounds, especially from Africa, because even when I was at a community college, never did was I ever told, or did I know that, grades got transferred from community college to certain universities and things like that. So what I always tell, to us, we just felt like the orientation I got was such that you leave community college, what really matters is what you do in terms of your grades at the university level. So when I got to the university and I was making A's, and the first semester I didn't quite have a 4.0, I was very surprised. And I asked why. They said, well, your grades got transferred from community college, and it did apply on that campus where I went to. But what I got earlier was that it didn't always apply. So there were things I didn't know about Ivy, like Ivy League schools, about what it took to get into different schools and things like that. So the orientation was very limited for me. And these days, I try to advise people about how to find some of this information so that they can be better informed in terms of knowing all that is out there. Even, schools like HBCUs and just all the opportunities that are out there. You'll be surprised by how much information is limited on some campuses. And so to answer your question, how did I find out about Our Lady of Lake University? They just happened to have an office there at North Harris Community College. I walked in and found out that, okay, they were offering some courses that I was potentially interested in. I applied and I was admitted. That's how my education career continued at Our Lady of Lake University.
Okay, great. And so talk a little bit now. Let's switch back to your going back home to Africa and Cameroon. Tell us about that decision and to go back, and maybe that was always your intent to go back. But talk a little bit about that transition back home.
Sure. I actually I came back to Cameroon to take on this new role in 2013. After my last corporate job ended, I was looking for something different. I wanted a role in which I could apply my skills to make things better, to improve work processes, cut back inefficiencies, and create an environment in which people could excel in their strengths while increasing productivity as a result. There were certain things that I'd always desired, which I really couldn't do on my last job in the corporate world. And I also had that desire to work in Africa for about 2 years as part of my career plan, but never got to doing it. And when this opportunity to move back to Africa presented itself, I decided to take on the challenge. Did I take a huge pay cut? Yes, I actually did. But it has been very rewarding otherwise. I have learned much about doing business in Africa. I've been a part of coaching a huge student population about their career future. I have had the opportunity to mentor and connect other colleagues with mentors, and I have actually redirected an organization into a path for growth as I observe the results in the decisions that we jointly make or that we jointly made under my leadership. So there is a whole lot that has transpired as a result of getting into this field and moving back to take on this role. And prior to getting into this position, I had taught information systems classes, and I also held the role of administration or administrative and academic officer at the university. Before taking on that role, before moving to ICTU, I held several positions in the corporate world, like I mentioned earlier, and it was not just in the corporate world, but in the field of education that prepared me for this role. While being a graduate student, or as a graduate student at University of South Florida, I taught undergraduate classes in computer information systems. And right after that, I also held different corporate training roles, implementation, subject matter expert, project lead, and quite a few roles before I wrapped up my career in the chemical industry as a knowledge management expert with the Dow Chemical Company in Midland, Michigan. And so taking this role in academia in Africa, it was quite an easier transition for me.
And what would you say were some of the challenges in that transition? It's great to hear that some of the things you achieved, and for example, when you were out in Florida, and the teaching you did and things like that, which helped to set you up for where you are now. What were some of the challenges that you faced, that you feel that you obviously have overcome now? Describe some of those.
Okay. Yes, indeed. Did I encounter challenges? I sure did. I mean, challenges from reverse culture shock and even change management within the organization. When I took on the job, I thought it would be easy and my ideas will always be welcome, especially because I could see how it would benefit the organization and and the employees as well as students. But that really wasn't always the case. Um, However, as a leader, I have learned to communicate and I have learned to listen. I've learned the difference between listening with my heart and listening with my head. And I learned quickly that every job is a new job and needs its own new strategies. When I got there, I want to use the term hit the ground running, right? I hit the ground running. I, had all these goals and timelines, but I had to learn how to slow down and get people to move along with me. As it is, the work culture here is very different than it is in the US. So, I had to learn how they approached different issues, how they approached their roles and work, and I had to introduce what I thought will definitely help benefit the the our growth. I quickly had to realize that the work culture that I came from or had lived in the past 18 years was quite different from what I was experiencing. And so I had to adopt the best practices without ruining what already existed. That was good. And also to get them on board with what we were trying to accomplish. And so though that transition was slow, but we got there and we're, every day it's getting better as we see results.
So, how many women are working with or in your, I guess it's department, I'm not sure how to call it, but how many women are there with you?
In leadership, we are just two women. And what I want to mention at this point also is that one of the challenges that I had was, coming back and being in a leadership role was that I was younger than most of my peers, all of whom were men that actually were in their 60s and above. So in Africa, we face this everywhere, but in Africa, you're also regarded as a woman, you're regarded as a younger woman, and the culture in most places in Africa, or at least I can speak for sub-Saharan Africa, is that women don't really get to talk. If they get to talk, they might also be perceived as being, very, for I don't know if aggressive is the word. So you kind of have to be careful about not coming across as offensive or commanding your peers that are men. But to find a way of synergizing your efforts. And so one of the little things that might kind of come across, which might be insignificant in the American culture, is the fact that here typically women don't look at men in the eye. So women, or as an aspect of respect, they don't look at senior people in the eyes. Whereas in the United States, if you speak with a senior person and you don't look at them in the eyes, for the most part, it might be considered as if you're not being honest, if I'm not wrong. I mean, it can be perceived a little bit differently, but here, there were little cultural aspects that I had to learn in order to work better with my team. So yes, in terms of the number of women in our organization is very limited. Also, considering the fact that we're highly focused in technology. I would say we probably have about For every woman working in the organization, we have maybe about 10 men. And that's kind of how it is.
So how do you deal with that every day? How do you, I mean, for example, you mentioned that you have to not come off a certain way. You have to you want to speak your mind, but you have to do it in a certain way so it's not going to come off culturally wrong or incorrect.
Inappropriate. Mhm.
How do you manage that? I get that question very often from young women about, you know, because I know in the U.S., I mean, you know, there's a stigma that if you're a woman and if you speak a lot and say a lot, then you're like too aggressive, you know. And if there was a man, you don't get that, you know, it's fine. That's just the way they are. But it's kind of seen, they try to make it seem negative, you know, and that has its reasons. I mean, it makes you quiet if you're seen as negative.
Mhm.
So there's a real basis for why that's the case. It's not really right, and not, you know, the correct way to be. But it's, you know, I get that question, and so apparently, you know, the younger generation also still feels that, and so how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you balance that?
Right. Well, thanks for asking that. I think in our context in Africa, for instance, I have learned to not have that glaring stare, which really wasn't the case in the first place. And I make sure, like a little body language technique. I know this is not much or the all of the answer, but I tend to mirror what they're saying, and I tend to just kind of uh, repeat, just improve on my communication skills, really. And in cases where I feel like they're feeling a little bit insecure or feeling a little bit that I am coming on to them, I make sure that coming on strong to them, I make sure that I explain, or at least I try to bring them to see it from my perspective, sometimes even uh, by having them repeat what I'm trying to communicate, just so that we kind of get on the same page. It's not, and it really varies from person to person, depending on whom I'm speaking with. Of course, if I'm, visiting a leader, is somebody in a government office, the way I would communicate with them is different than somebody within my organization. So I tend to really be flexible, but I really watch out um, for their communication skills, and I kind of, their ways of communicating, and I try to, work with that in a way that the way I communicate back doesn't really bring out any thoughts of confrontation or any of that. Obviously, it's you won't always be successful at getting through to the other person, but I think that a lot of times, if when I get people to see things from my perspective, when I take my time to explain or to get them on the same page with me, they understand where I'm trying to get to. I remember though when I had a corporate job in the U.S. On the contrary, I wasn't very expressive. I wasn't very vocal, and sometimes that was misconstrued for not being very engaging. And like you said, sometimes when you engage, it came across as if I was trying to be really forceful with my ideas. So, I mean, I just think that, at the end of the day, you try to find a balance, if, by asking questions and by trying to, use communication skills, some of the communication skills for example, if someone asks a question, I'll get back to them and let them know what I understand, just to be sure that I am on this, we're on the same page and I am clear in my response. So there are things that you really can avoid at the end of the day. In Cameroon, for example, even if you communicate well in certain circumstances, just because you're a woman, they still wouldn't really like the aspect that you're trying to tell them what to do, even if it's for the good of the institution, and you just have to deal with that. I do know of certain religious groups where they actually you know, don't appreciate women telling them, you know, what to do, even if they're in leadership. But you also have to deal with that and let them see why you're doing what you're doing. And that's really the best you can do. And that's the way I handle that.
Yeah, I guess that does get tiring after a while, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Because
It
it's
certainly
extra
does.
work. It's
Yes.
extra work that you have to do just to
Yes.
accommodate other people. When,
Yes.
when reality, you just want to get your work done and do your work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you
Yes.
have allies there? I mean, male allies who you feel understand?
I actually do. You know, in every group, there is always going to be somebody that really understands where you're coming from and what you're trying to get at. I must say that one of the bigger challenges for me was, um, getting people to move from a laissez-faire and lax attitude towards work. Um, and to be able to move them from that stance and to get them to really be more disciplined. I don't know, in general, if you're a little bit, familiar with the French culture. I'm not saying that we're adopting all of that, but I'm talking about certain aspects about, if you go to France, people have 2-hour lunches and things like that, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in our context here, sometimes, I learned a lot of good things from the United States about, being on time, about, setting goals, about making sure that those goals align with the corporate goals and things like that, which, I made sure that I incorporated into what we're doing in our organization. Whereas it wasn't always the case. And one thing that I noticed about employees that are not very, I would say employees that are really not very serious, is that they don't like accountability. It's very, very common to find people here that, that don't really like to be held accountable. But a good thing, and the one good thing that I noticed, is that why we set those goals in organizations and institutions in the United States, it's so that, we are able to hold people or each other accountable and make sure that we're driving towards something. Without goals, you don't really have a good sense of direction. You might think you have it all in your head, but it's really not the case. So I did a lot of restructuring in that space to make sure that, okay, we really had, they were able to give us some results at the end of the month, quarterly, and all of that. So yes, definitely there were some changes. There've been a lot of changes that I've been able to bring into the space in that regard.
So, so do you find that there are young women in who are um, who I mean, what's the sense of young women in that environment and what they see in terms of only two women in the leadership position? I mean, do you get questions? Do they look and wonder? Do they say anything? Do they just say that they accept it as it is? Or, I mean, or do you get a lot of questions about it and do a lot of mentoring, and let them know about, this can change in the future, and, what do you hear from them? What do they ask?
Yes, I think that we're trying to really change this within our corporate culture. We're trying to make sure that more women are involved, not just in leadership. And by trying, we've been working quite a bit in terms of recruiting women into different positions where they can shadow and have a buddy system with other people in leadership. And it's a slow process, but we're getting there because we believe that through this buddy relationship, I feel that they can easily move into some of those roles that are currently being held by men. Because, one of my goals is to really empower young women, in in their roles, to know that, okay, you can do better. It's not really a male or a female thing. It's not, you're not doing this kind of role because you're a woman, or he's not doing that kind of role because he's a man. It might have been that initially. I wouldn't really say that for our organization specifically, but we are working at making sure that there is that good balance in roles, and it's in progress. Do they ask questions? Some of them do. Some accept it as it is, and they do because it's very common. It is what they see day by day, in with the way the country functions. And I won't talk much on that, but we're trying to make sure that women are really empowered, because from my experience, women really, in leadership positions, really, really not only speak for other women, but it's been proven that women also make very good leaders. So it's not really, it shouldn't be a sexist thing. It's really about, performance and what they are bringing to the table in terms of contribution. So I want, my employees to know that they are also valued, not because of, because they are women, but because of what they are currently bringing and what they can bring to the table.
So what do you see as do you see that changing, the ratio of men to women there, and understanding the culture and the difficulties that women have? I mean, do you see that it will change in the future, you think?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to change. Is it going to be equal? I'm not sure, but what I want to say is that for us to really get there, our women need to be trained. Our women need to be equipped. It can't just happen, because it can't just happen because they are women. They have to be given the opportunities as well. And so that's what I am driving at. For one, I started recently a STEM organization, STEM standing for Science, Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And what I realized is that our women are not very equipped. We need that capacity building. And we need to get them ready for these positions, because it's a tough sell to walk up, in a board meeting and say, we want more women here, without being able to show evidence of the fact that they're actually qualified to fit into that role. And I don't know of any better way in terms of what, I'm implementing at this time to make sure that our women have that body system with a lot of the men in the organization for easy transition. I mean, there is a lot more that we're working in the background, but I think that in terms of, our organization and the community, I think that it could happen for the community, but we need to empower women a lot more. We need to do a better job at getting us up to speed with what's really happening in the society today.
Yeah, it means that, and also finding allies, male allies, who will also promote it. So
Yes.
before we go, could you talk a little bit about, you just talked about your organization, could you talk a bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I did mention a little bit more about the ICT University, and the ICT University started as an online training education platform or university, and we actually had our first campus in Cameroon in the year 2012. So in Cameroon is still quite a baby, and why we chose the US curriculum is because we were looking at something that will give the students a little bit more hands-on training. And I think that we kind of analyzed different curriculums, and we wanted to introduce that US system of education here in Cameroon. And since then, there is a campus in Cameroon, there is the campus in Uganda, and we're in partnership with universities like Makerere University Business School in Uganda, and we're soon to launch another campus in Kaduna. and Kaduna, that happens to be in Nigeria. And so we have a lot of our students that take classes online, which, this is fairly new in Cameroon, because what happens is that there are a lot of schools that record trainings and put online for students to kind of go back and watch and take exams. But we decided to use a format where we actually have live trainings. And so this is really how we operate in the region. And our goal at the university is really to provide quality ICT and managerial training for Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. And so recently, I did mention about vacademy.com, which was birthed out of this. And what Vacademy is striving now at doing is also to offer some really short trainings, because what we realize is that in Cameroon, for example, prior to the work that we're doing here, there are a lot of people that have, Cameroon is one of the most, the countries in sub-Saharan, it's the most educated country in sub-Saharan Africa, I should say. But what happens is that you have a lot of people with degrees, bachelor's, master's, and they don't have any hands-on training. And we already have a lot of these people in the workforce that are not ready to quit their jobs, to come back and sit down to do a full bachelor's program and all of that. So I came up with vacademy.com, which is an online training platform as well for such people to actually interact with a lot of skilled resources in the United States to help them update their skills through online training to prep them for future roles. And so that's the kind of training that we've been very engaged with in Africa. And really a lot of people are, I would say I find pleasure in seeing a lot of our graduates go through the programs amongst all odds. And today some of them are self-made entrepreneurs and are actually working to bring some of these technologies in the organizations where they work. So it's really been a good change, which has been beneficial to other organizations in the area.
So this has been great, and I'm wondering, you made some really interesting points about some of the challenges, and it's really extremely commendable that you're one of two female leaders there. I mean, it says a lot about your capabilities, and also obviously the role model that you are for other young women out there, and men as well. What would be, so I guess, if you had, and you've already stated some things about having women needing to be prepared and things like that. I'm wondering if you had any other just final thoughts about for young women who may be listening to this from any place in the U.S. or around the world, about how you've overcome your challenges and accomplished some of the things that you've done, and just anything that any advice you would impart to them.
Well, absolutely. What I really want to say is that in your career, never stop learning and never give up. You will fail at something. You will fail in an attempt or whatever you might be trying to achieve. There's a potential that you will not always get it the first time, but if you don't make it the first time, try again. You learn from your mistakes and move forward. And even at the level, within your career, there are always going to be challenges. It could be with race, it could be the task at hand. There will always be challenges, but let that not limit you in any way. Let that not stop your drive towards accomplishing what you have in mind. And you're unique and you have a God-given potential. So and there will always be naysayers or people that might not be there to really promote you. But also remember that there are a lot of people out there that want to be your allies, and never be, you don't need to be shy about moving up to someone and saying, hey, can you mentor me? Hey, can you assist me? And, in getting to where I want to go to. And there are a lot of people that are willing, but you have to help them, give them a little bit of a clear direction in terms of where you want to go. But just, as women of color, as people in general, don't give up. The world is very vast. It's very wide. There are a plethora of opportunities, and go for what you wanna get. And remember that even on the job, if you don't, maybe you're not as performant as you expect to be. Your job doesn't really define who you are. You're still a unique person, and you should surround yourself with people that validate that in you, because you're worth a lot more than you think. And career-wise, don't stop learning. The ladies at my school, even my employees, or the people that report to me, as a matter of fact, I always encourage them, and there's nothing that makes me feel as good as when I see them growing in their careers. And for everyone, I would say, don't stop learning. Keep learning. There's a lot to learn, and also keep sharing. So, that's just kind of what makes the world go round. And let other people learn from your strengths. Let them learn. Don't hesitate about sharing your experiences, and pulling someone up, especially as women and women of color. We should really always work as allies with each other, and also get out of your comfort zone and your race to find people that can actually help you get there, because we really cannot. You can't do it on your own. It's always teamwork.
Great. Those are great ideas and great thoughts, and to end by. So really congratulations for all you've done, and for being the mentor that you are for so many women out there. And keep up the excellent work that you're doing. And really, thanks for taking the time to do this. And for those listening, it's on a Sunday afternoon here in the U.S. So it's a different time in Cameroon. So
Yes.
Thanks for doing this. I really, really do appreciate this. And so we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Thanks for having me.
Okay, my pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining Women of Color, Advancing Peace and Security. Please visit WCAPS.org. That's WCAPS.org.